Pa'apao. This is Kaiopua Fife with the Koani Foundation, bringing you another segment of Voices of Truth, one-on-one with Hawaii's future. And as you'll see throughout the program, those of you who are familiar with the island of Oahu, I think you'll guess where we are. We'll have a little bit of background on that. But even more important than where we are, it's who we are with today. And today we're very happy to be with Poka Laenui. Poka, mahalo for making the time to be with us.
It's a pleasure.
We had the distinct pleasure of being in Geneva not too long ago for the United Nations periodic review of the United States and their obligations through the UN process. And so Poka has been very active over the years at the UN, but hadn't been there for a while. And I'm really interested in seeing what your perspective is or was on what transpired most recently. Kind of, you know, what do you think about our last trip to, most recent trip to Geneva? Yeah.
Before I jump right into Geneva, and if we can just maybe bring a connection to this place we're here, you and I sitting here, and while we're in Geneva, we're sitting shoulder to shoulder at the conference and speaking to groups. So if we can perhaps join some connection between the two. Here we are at a place called Malaya. Malaya Bay. Other people have called it Pokai, with a misunderstanding of what Pokai really is about and where it's located. At Malaya Bay, we sit right next to a heiau called Ku Ilioloa, or sometimes it's called Kana Ilioloa heiau, dedicated or rededicated by Paea Kamehameha. And so how do you connect that with the United Nations and the activities that happen in the international arena? And I think if we reflect back to our history, as Paea Kamehameha died, or when he was on his deathbed in Kailua Kona, and when one of his ali'i, John Young, asked him, "Oh, my chief, is there any words that you leave back to us, any guiding principles?" And he said, essentially, be undeterred, for the pono that I have worked towards have not been completed. Iku upono aole pau. And so he says, continue in that movement with the foundation of pono for Hawaii. And then later on, and later on his son, Kauike Aoli, incorporated some of that saying in his receiving Hawaii's sovereignty back from Britain in his speech, where he says, "Ua mau ke ea o ka aina I ka pono." In the song Kana'i au Puni, they say, "E mau ke ea o ka aina I ka pono." But the resounding refrain of pono remains there. When Lili'o Kalani comes up, and in her writings, in her poetry, in her music, it's always that resounding pono, peace,
and
love.
Pono being defined as
appropriateness, as fairness. Some people call it as justice. Other people call it as balance, as wellness. In essence, what is right and what is good. And so it's from those principles of what is appropriate for Hawaii and for other human beings, for nature and all of that stuff. It's a continuing refrain, whether we're talking about Hawaiian sovereignty, independence, human rights and all that stuff. It's that continuing refrain of pono that you and I and many of us in the various Hawaiian causes or movements are continually seeking for. And so whether we are sitting in Geneva, Switzerland, or out here in Waianae or in other places, we must continually remind ourselves that that is essentially what the goal is.
Well, the question is, why did we go to Switzerland? Why did we go to Geneva? Why did we go to New York, the headquarters in New York, and other places in the world? And it's pursuing the same justice or balance or fairness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that equity, all of those wonderful words,
Right.
peace and appropriateness for people. And this too is our continuing voyage towards Pono, and going to the United Nations most recently in Geneva, and having the United Nations take a new approach to the question of human rights and fundamental freedoms, where it's not only the accusing finger of the large nations that can point to the smaller nations
Yeah.
about the bad things that they have been doing
Right.
to their people and the rest.
Mhm.
But when the Human Rights Commission, I think it's called now, or Council, says from now on all nations will be reviewed once every 4 years, whether you're the United States or Great Britain or Iraq or whatever it is.
Universal periodic
the
review.
Universal periodic
Right.
review. And I thought it was a wonderful change, a wonderful idea, and for the United States to be reviewed and to be put on that grid of the appropriateness that they have been conducting themselves.
Well, the significant thing about the Universal Periodic Review, you know, we've been there previously in Geneva and in New York, wherein there were covenants or there were treaties or there were committee work. There was committee work, which required periodic review. But the Universal Periodic Review actually looks at the overall conformance or complicity, the status of the state that's on deck at the time, regarding all of the UN mechanisms, principles, treaties, everything. So that was the significance of this one, and that's why we were so pleased that you could come, because one of the things that our supporters in the UN system have been looking for is a greater cross-section, a broader representation from Hawaii in presenting our issues. So that's why we were very, very pleased that you could participate with us and be there. Plus your extraordinary contributions that you always bring to them.
Well, at times also for the United Nations to expect or anticipate that you will really get to the full grassroots participation, especially when dealing with indigenous peoples. I think it's good that the United Nations open that opportunity, and yet you have to realize that when you're really talking about indigenous people, oftentimes they have no opportunity to come to the venue in Geneva.
Yeah.
You know, I've worked with a lot of indigenous people. I've represented the World Council of Indigenous People, and I've seen the experience of people not even being able to come out of country,
Of course.
having to sneak from one to another country without travel documents and the
right.
rest. So,
And in some cases, for instance, at the UN headquarters, there are some people from some areas of the world who are not allowed into the United States.
yeah,
And
that's
there's
another barrier.
That's one of the reasons Geneva seems to be more welcoming to people from throughout the world.
Yeah. Some people, some in the audience may not be familiar with the distinction between the work of the United Nations in Geneva as opposed to the work that is done in New York City. And people don't realize that the United Nations is actually located in other major centers.
Yeah.
But in Geneva, that's the heart of human rights activities.
Yeah.
New York is more the political activities. So that's why in our case, when we last went there, it was to Geneva to address a human rights issue.
Exactly.
Yeah. And in this Universal Periodic Review, or what is called the UPR, two fundamental standards or documents were the standards by which one would measure another country. One being the Charter of the United Nations, and the second being the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And then you have a lot of these other covenants and conventions that were also considered.
Right.
But principally, those two were the main measure. And with regards to us Hawaiians going to Geneva, so what does all that mean? You know, it seems like so airy-fairy. What is the relevance there?
Right.
And it's because a lot of people don't fully appreciate the conditions that we are in.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's an educational process from our perspective. We're not expecting that there's going to be a huge, you know, a switch of a light switch, and all of a sudden everyone is going to start supporting what we're doing. What we're essentially doing is trying to educate, establish relationships, have conversations with others from throughout the world so that they can
Yeah.
become familiar with our history and our issues.
yeah. It's an incremental education
A
process.
bite at a time.
Yeah.
It had been a while since you'd been there. Many of the people who had done some really heavy lifting early on have passed away. Many are still working hard. But the great thing is that things that have been done in the past are constantly referred to. Interventions, position papers, research. That's what's so great, is that it still exists and it's constantly referred to. And hopefully many of the things that we present will continue to build and be referred to relating to our issues.
Yeah.
So you're having been gone for a while. There are a few changes there, but
Yeah.
what was your take on?
I think there's two things that always we need to observe. One is the current activities and the personalities. The people who have come and gone. There's been people who have been murdered as a result of the participation.
Right.
I've worked with them. I know them. We've tried to stop these kinds of stuff from happening.
Right.
And so I was able to see one aspect of, let's say, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and the deaths and the atrocities that occurred as a result of that process. And yet you have the continuity of the work, the statements being made, the values and standards being established. So that always remains the same, the continuing strive to achieve appropriateness and the resistance by governments to not be accused being pointed at.
Yeah.
And that's why the UPR process was so important, because now it gave other governments the opportunity on a level basis, so that you had governments such as North Korea or Syria and others able to say, we are concerned about the United States, what is happening in Guantanamo and other places.
One of the critical things, looking at the evolution or the flow over a period of time too, is that the faces and the politics change from time to time. And so you have kind of a waving action of support at a certain level from certain states at one period of time, and then it dissipates for other reasons. And a lot of it has to do with funding. A lot of it has to do with current war situations, natural disasters, and so we find that there at times are supportive states who, because of their current circumstances, can't be quite as open as they would be. We can speak off the record, and they're still supportive of us, but you know, for the sake of expediency and necessity, they kind of have to ride the wave, you know, and we have to do the same thing and work with it. So it's a long-term approach.
It is, the domestic politics. For a time, you know, I've been attending the UN when Clinton had been in, even the effects of Reagan's administration, more recently the Bush administration, and yet you have the Obama administration. So oftentimes you have these prophets of doom, saying, oh, the United States will never adopt this resolution or the work we did in the ILO, the Convention on the Rights of Indigenous People. The U.S. will never adopt it. But what we need to do as warriors for Pono is make the incremental steps, even though we are facing so many people who say this will never happen.
Yeah, the naysayers,
Yeah, because as of a month ago or within the last month, Obama says, I'm changing the position of the United States. We are adopting the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So you can never predict this will never happen.
Yeah.
And I think that is the value of the term Homanava Nui.
Mm-hmm.
Homanava Nui does not really mean to sit back, relax because get plenty time and do nothing but just
Yeah.
sit on your
Yeah,
okole.
yeah.
Homanava Nui means prepare, prepare,
Yeah,
prepare.
yeah.
Because when the time comes, you
That's
got to
it.
be ready.
And that's critical. That's something that we keep reminding ourselves is the importance of timing and keeping the pressure on and keeping the momentum forward. And when the wave of support happens to be at the right level, then some things can happen, you know. So it's a matter of working at it conscientiously and being prepared, as you say, always preparing, and
Yeah.
always looking everywhere for support.
Incrementally,
Yeah.
take what you
Yeah.
can,
Yeah.
but never lose sight of what we deserve and
Yeah.
what should be done.
Yeah.
It's the same issue as the whole question of emancipation of the blacks from slavery.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in 1860, that war between the states or the Civil War, whatever you choose to call it, you didn't find the slaves saying, no, 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 I don't want emancipation because I won't have the right to vote and I still have to drink at the blacks only water fountains and sit in the back of the bus. They didn't say that. They said, give me whatever I can
Get
have.
today, yeah.
Yeah. And then we'll fight another day for even more. And that's how human rights and fundamental freedoms are accomplished. This was an opportunity, although we are not governments at this particular point in time, but it gave us the opportunity to talk to the governments and inform them about the Hawaii situation. And then that opportunity came where the Obama administration said, not only are we going to face all of the governments of the world and their criticism, but we're also going to provide an opportunity for what we call a town hall meeting, where civil society is able to come and we can talk with non-governmental individuals and organizations and face their criticism.
And I think it was unusual, not for the Obama administration, generally speaking, and within the domain of the United States, but I think it's somewhat unusual at the UN for a state to have essentially a town hall meeting of all of those people who were there to protest violations and to demand justice. So that was very unique, and the way that you were able to actually ask a question and pose an issue was pretty unique, because you actually sat down in the wrong seat. Is that true?
I took
it was the right seat.
open.
It was the right seat, but within the setup of the town hall meeting, there were assigned seats, and there were signs of who represented what and so forth. And some people felt that the facilitator was informed in advance of who would be sitting where and where to make the emphasis on the facilitation. And I wasn't in the room at the time, but what I heard afterward was that you had inadvertently sat down in a seat where it was okay for the facilitator to ask, and you posed the situation and made a statement, and which we otherwise would never, I don't think we would have had the opportunity.
Yeah, we would not. I think to a certain extent it wasn't really inadvertence. You know, I'm somewhat familiar with the UN system, and I know what the seating arrangements are, and so I placed myself.
What they portend,
Yeah. So I asked this woman who was reserving these other seats. I say, "This person coming?" She says, "No, I don't think so." I says, "Okay, I'm going to sit there." She says, "Yeah, okay." And so I called, who was that? Josh Cooper, also from Hawaii. I said, "Josh, take that seat. I'm sitting up here." And then the next step is making the eye contact to the moderator. And, you know, I'm a innocent looking, very conservative looking individual, right?
Not offensive.
Not offensive, and I didn't think the question was offending, but it was, I think, well pointed. For those who were not in Geneva at that time, let me just recite the question that I had posed. And because it was part of that universal periodic review. So the question I had asked was the following, and it took about 2 minutes, which was the maximum we were given.
Right.
I said I want to make 3 points and then ask one question. Point number 1, 1893, the United States invaded Hawaii, began the occupation, basically took over Hawaii in violation of international law. And this the United States admitted to in 1993, 100 years later, in what they call the apology. I call it the confession by the United States.
Yeah.
Point number 2, in 1945, the Charter of the United Nations is signed, and in Article 73, it says that all these countries that are administering non-self-governing territories need to move these territories to self-governance. And in self-governance, you give them 3 options: independence, free association, or integration with the administering state.
Right.
1946, the United States itself submitted Hawaii as one of the territories. It was obligating itself to bring about this right of
process.
Yeah, these 3 choices.
Right.
1959, last point in history, a question is put to American citizens in Hawaii. And the question is, shall Hawaii be immediately admitted into the Union as a state? You vote yes, we become a state. You vote no, we're still integrated. So there was no real choice of independence. So my question to the Obama administration is this: is the administration willing to review the events and reopen the question of self-determination for Hawaii? Okay. The response was, well, it's a political action that we had taken, and we are not ready to reopen the question. So the answer is no. That was an off-the-cuff response because they had not expected
They weren't prepared
the
for
question.
it, and they weren't anticipating being exposed to that type of discussion.
At that time.
Yeah.
I don't like the answer,
Yeah.
but I like the fact that we got an answer, because now we know exactly what the standard is or what the response is, and what we need to do for the next 4 years is work to show how that answer itself is contrary to international law. The fact that you took a political action to steal a place does not now obviate the injustice, the inappropriateness, the violation of human rights for that theft. It's like saying, well, we legitimized slavery a long time ago.
No.
So
Because it was politically settled.
yeah, that we
Settled.
don't need
no
to
longer
reopen
an
the
issue.
question.
No longer an issue.
Yeah. But now we have something to deal with specifically. So it's another incremental movement ahead. Yeah. So I thought it was a good opportunity.
Well, I think it was fantastic. I mean, we don't get our expectations up too high, except that our intent is to communicate with as many people as possible, to recite the true history and the true issues as clearly as possible, and to give as many people an opportunity to open their minds and be supportive of us just as we can be supportive of them. That essentially gets to the nut of what we wanted to discuss, and our segment is winding down. I'm hoping that with the same focus that you're going to be open to participating with us in the future. I know you're a very busy person, but your focus on this element, this area, I know, I hope we can expect to have you stay involved with that.
Oh yeah, I intend to.
Poka, mahalo for being with us. So pleasure to be with you, and thank you folks for tuning in. Some of this seems far removed, but I appreciate your kind of bringing back to what the relevance is of what we do elsewhere and how it ties in with what we need to be doing here at home also. Once again, I'm Kaiopua Fife with the Kiwani Foundation, bringing you another segment of Voices of Truth, one-on-one with Hawaii's Future, a component of the Free Hawaii Broadcasting System. Mahalo and hui ho.
Mahalo Mahalo for watching Voices of Truth one-on-one with Hawaii's Future. Watch us on the web 24/7 at voicesoftruthtv.com. You'll find all our shows, including this one, in case you want to see it again or share it with family and friends. Also view our weekly video commentaries at freehawaiitv.com. And check out our blog, published daily, at freehawaii.info. It's all part of the Free Hawaii Broadcasting Network.